So Baldur's Gate 3 patch 8 just came out, and I'm addicted to the game again. Anyways, each of these builds is going to be based off a single element, either fire, ice, lightning, or thunder, meaning each character will specialize only in one element. You will pretty much only be able to build these characters in Act 3, since that's when you get the cool stuff. Alright, so for our Ice Knight, we're basically going to create a character that is able to deal out very large amounts of single target damage, around 92 on average, as well as deal really large amounts of damage in an area of effect, all while staying within the theme of ice and cold spells and abilities. So let's talk about the 3 weapons that are critical to making this build work. The first weapon is Trident of the Waves in the main hand, Cold Snap Dagger in the offhand, and Never Misser crossbow in the bow slot. So Trident of the Waves is very important to this build because what it does is that when it hits an enemy, it inflicts them with the wet status. It doesn't say so in the weapon description in-game, but it does. Wet means that they are vulnerable to lightning and cold damage. But our build is actually not using the wet status for this purpose. We're actually going to be using it to inflict the frozen status. And I'll talk about that after I talk about the Cold Snap Dagger, because they go hand in hand. So the Cold Snap Dagger is in our offhand, and its important ability is that when an enemy misses an attack on us, they will get inflicted with the chilled status. Chilled means they are vulnerable to cold damage for 2 turns. Now it says in the description here that they have to fail a Constitution saving throw for this chilled status to actually be applied, but it's not true. If they miss an attack, they will get the chilled status. There is no saving throw. And now chilled will be important for us because 1, it makes enemies vulnerable to cold damage, but 2 is if an enemy is already chilled and then they get the wet status, they then get the 3rd status, which is the frozen status. And frozen means they're incapacitated, and they also are vulnerable to bludgeoning, force, and thunder damage. Now the Never Misser crossbow is important because it is the only weapon that does pure force damage, and we'll be using this to inflict very heavy single point damage against targets, particularly targets that have been inflicted or afflicted with the frozen status. So the strategy for dealing large amounts of area of effect damage will basically be the Cold Snap Dagger applying chilled to enemies that miss us with attacks. So we're just going to be moving around the map. We're going to take a potion of flying and fly around the map next to enemies and then fly away from them in order to provoke opportunity attacks. We're going to pump up our defense so that way all those opportunity attacks miss, and then all those enemies get afflicted with the chilled status. And you can kind of see what I'm doing on the screen right now, just flying around, getting enemies to miss me. They all get afflicted with a chilled status, and then I hit them with a cold spell. The really nice thing about this strategy for applying chilled status is that we're not using an action or a bonus action to apply the chilled status. We're essentially just expending movement speed to apply chilled to all these different enemies. Normally you'd have to cast Create Water or throw a water jug down, which costs an action in order to apply chilled. Here, we're just using our movement speed to apply chilled to all these characters. After all these characters get afflicted with the chilled status, we're going to either cast Cone of Cold on them, or we're going to cast the cold version of Glyph of Warding, and deal just massive amounts of damage to large groups of enemies all at once. It will also be useful for our regular attacks, since our regular attacks will also do cold damage as well. So let's talk about the multi-classing of this character. We're going to be multi-classing the crap out of this character, and the first level we are taking is Sorcerer. The reason we're taking Sorcerer is because we want proficiency in Constitution saving throws. Now, Fighter also gives you proficiency in Constitution saving throws, and it also gives you the ability to use heavy armor, but our character is not going to be using heavy armor. And additionally, we want the extra spell slots that Sorcerer gives us. Sorcerer also gives us access to Shield, which we're going to be using a lot in order to protect our character from attacks. Again, Shield is essentially you spend 1 spell slot, 1 reaction, and then you get +5 to your armor class for the turn. The next class that we're taking is one of the new patch 8 classes, the Oath of the Crown class. We're going to take 4 levels in this, reason being because we want Divine Smite, we want access to proficiency in martial weapons, which the Trident is a martial weapon, and we want the very powerful level 2 ability of this subclass, Righteous Clarity. Righteous Clarity is something you get at level 2, and it costs a bonus action and essentially gives you +4 to your attack rolls for 10 turns without the need for concentration. It's frankly overpowered. We're then going to take 6 levels in Bard. Reason being, we want access to the ranged version of Slashing Flourish. That is because we want to maximize the force damage that we're going to be doing with the Never Misser crossbow on our frozen targets. So essentially what this means is that we're going to be shooting 2 arrows for the price of 1 at a frozen target, and with our various modifiers, with the sharpshooter feat that we will be taking, we are going to do on average 92 damage to single targets that have been afflicted with the frozen status. Finally, we're going to take 1 level in Wizard because we want to learn some high-level spells, and we also want to learn Haste. So that's the main reason for the Wizard subclass. I also forgot to mention, for Paladin, our fighting style will be defense, and for Bard, our fighting style will be 2-weapon fighting. As far as the feats that we'll be taking, we're going to be taking the Sharpshooter feat and the Dual Wielder feat. Regarding the stats of the character, we're not going to invest anything in Strength because we're going to be using the Gauntlets of Hill Giant Strength, so that will automatically take our Strength up to 23. We're doing this because we want to deal at least a fair amount of damage with our martial weapons, the Trident of the Waves and the Cold Snap Dagger. We are going to invest in Dexterity and Intelligence. Those are the 2 stats we're primarily going to invest in. We also don't want to skimp out on the Constitution because, again, we want to have at least some ability to succeed concentration checks. So the armor that I'm using in this video is not necessarily the same armor or equipment that I'd be using if I was doing all 4 Elemental Knights in one party. This is kind of just, I wanted to test out this one build, so I did give it equipment that might be better or might be used only if I was doing a single character. Whereas if I was using all 4 Elemental Knights, I'd probably have to distribute some of this equipment among the various characters in the party. But anyways, I'm using the Horns of the Berserker because I want the +2 to attack rolls to help offset the -5 penalty I'm taking from the Sharpshooter feat. I'm using the Cloak of Displacement just again to help avoid opportunity attacks. Boots of Striding because it will prevent us from getting knocked prone when we're concentrating on a spell, and if you are, and the reason that's important is because if you are knocked prone while you are concentrating, you automatically lose concentration. The Armor of Agility, this is just good armor to raise our armor class, but it also gives us a +2 to saving throws, namely our concentration saving throws. The Gauntlets of Hill Giant Strength will just be used to increase our strength to 23. Now, in the video, I wasn't using these 2 rings. I was using the Ring of Elemental Infusion, and I was also using the Eversight Ring. Just the Eversight Ring because the battle against the House of Grief is very difficult if you are blinded and they cast darkness on you. And then the Elemental Infusion Ring was just to increase the damage from the Trident and the Dagger. But if I had a party of 4 Elemental Knights, I'd be giving that Ring of Elemental Infusion to another party member. So instead, you can use the Snowburst Ring, which will cause a circle of ice around targets, and then the Strange Conduit Ring will just add 1 to 4 psychic damage to your weapon attacks. This Amulet of the Devout will just help raise our spell save DC, so that way enemies will be more susceptible to taking full damage from the cold spells. And then that's pretty much the armor and equipment that you're going to be using on this character if you are running with all 4 of the Elemental Knights. Lastly, I just wanted to comment on adding cold damage to the Trident of the Waves. In order to do this, you will put the Trident of the Waves in the main hand and the Flail of Ages in the offhand. Then you will use the elemental weapon ability of the Flail of Ages, and for some reason, when it's in the offhand, the bonus gets applied to the main hand. So in this case, the bonus cold damage gets applied to the Trident of the Waves rather than the Flail of Ages. Then you unequip the Flail of Ages and then put the Cold Snap Dagger back in your offhand. So now to talk about the lightning build. This is the most multi-classed of all these characters. Feels like I took a level in every single class just to make this character, but essentially we're going to be taking 6 levels in Eldritch Knight Fighter, 2 levels in Sorcerer, 2 levels in Oath of the Crown Paladin, 1 level in the Tempest Domain Cleric, and then 1 level in Wizard. So we're going to start with the Eldritch Knight Fighter, because starting with Fighter gives us heavy armor proficiency as well as Constitution saving throw proficiency. And again, that's important because we want proficiency in our concentration saving throws. We're taking 2 levels in Sorcerer because we want to, 1, be able to make sorcery points, and 2, be able to make spell slots. Because we don't have a lot of spell slots given the class that we took. We also want it for extended spell because we are going to be casting Create Water on our enemies, and by using extended spell, we can make the wet condition last for 6 turns rather than 3 turns. We're also going to want Twinned Spell because 1, we can use it to twin spell the elemental weapon from the Drakethroat Glaive, meaning that we can use that elemental weapon on 2 weapons. Usually that means 1 of our weapons, which will be the hammer that we use, and on 1 of our allies' weapons. So we can just double the amount of elemental damage that we're doing. We can also use this to twin spell, twin cast haste if we need to. The level 2 Paladin is just so we can get our Divine Smite and so we can get Righteous Clarity to get that +4 to our attack rolls, and then to be able to do that extra single target damage with the Divine Smite. The level 1 in the Cleric is just so we have access to Create Water. And the level 1 in Wizard is so that way we have access to a range of spells. We're actually going to invest all our points in Strength and Intelligence, so that way we're going to have 16 Intelligence, will allow us to have a total of 4 spells from the Wizard class. Those spells are going to be Haste, Glyph of Warding, Lightning Bolt, and then really it doesn't matter after that. You can get Misty Step, that's always good. Our Storm Sorcerer is going to allow us to take spells as well, and with that we're going to take Shield, so we don't need to use that from we don't need to take that under the Wizard class. As far as our weapons go, we're going to be using the Chargebound Warhammer. This is the only good lightning melee weapon I could find. I'm not sure if there's a better one, but essentially it does an additional 1d6 lightning damage if the weapon is a packed weapon for a Warlock or a bound weapon for an Eldritch Knight. I found that this build works way better if we just use Eldritch Knight, so we're not going down the pathway of the Warlock. Our offhand weapon is going to be that legendary staff. I have no idea how to pronounce it. This is essentially going to give us lightning charges for us to do additional lightning damage with our melee weapon, and then it's going to allow us to cast a free lightning bolt, a free chain lightning, and then a free any spell because of its arcane battery ability. Then for our bow, we're going to be using the Hellfire Engine crossbow solely because it gives us access to a level 4 lightning arrow, so it's just another free spell. And we need all these free spells because we don't have a lot of spell slots at baseline given our multi-class distribution. I also forgot to mention that the chain lightning from that legendary staff can also be twin cast. As far as how we're going to be doing damage with the Chargebound Warhammer, we should probably have around 18 to 20 strength, and you can get this through the Hag's Hair, the Mirror of Loss, or that potion of like Everlasting Vigor, the one that increases your strength by 2 that you get in Act 2 from the Drow vendor. As far as the rings go, the important ring that we need is the Ring of Elemental Infusion. This is going to additionally add more lightning damage to our attacks. So we're going to have, our Chargebound Warhammer doing 1d6 lightning damage, plus 1d4 lightning damage from the elemental weapon we cast on it, plus 1d4 damage from the Ring of Elemental Infusion, plus additional lightning damage from our lightning charges. And then all that's doubled because our enemies are wet and have vulnerability to lightning damage. And another very important piece of equipment is the Helmet of Arcane Acuity. As we smack our enemies with a hammer, we're going to build up our Arcane Acuity charges, which will then make our enemies much more likely to fail saving throws against our lightning spells. The feats that we'll be taking for this are going to be Dual Wielder and Warcaster, again for concentration, saving throw, advantage. As far as gloves, in this video I'm using the Luminous gloves, but the better alternative would be Legacy of the Masters. Regarding creating sorcery points and spell slots, you only need 2 levels of sorcerer to gain that ability. In order to create these sorcery points, we're going to be just chugging elixirs of arcane cultivation. And so what you'll do is you'll cycle through different elixirs. So you'll take a level 1 elixir, then you'll make a sorcery point from the level 1 slot. You'll take a level 2, make a sorcery point from the level 2 slot, and you have to keep rotating through them. You can never take the same elixir twice. So that's how you'll make your sorcery points. You can also make sorcery points by using up all your level 1 and level 2 spell slots, and then taking a Potion of Angelic Reprieve, because that will restore all your level 1 and level 2 spell slots. After that, you can then convert your sorcery points back into higher level spell slots. So next we have the Thunder Knight build. This will also be able to do a lot of single target damage as well as have good area of effect damage abilities. It is another multi-classed build, and the classes that make it up are the level 5 Oath of Vengeance Paladin, level 6 Tempest Domain Cleric, and level 1 Wizard. So first let's talk about the area of effect damage that we'll be able to do with this class. This will primarily be coming from the Tempest Domain subclass, as well as our main hand weapon, which is the legendary trident, the Nirulna. The Nirulna has 2 area of effect abilities. The first is called Zephyr Flash. This is like a charge attack, except it deals 6 to 48 damage. Now with the Tempest Domain Cleric, we will be able to utilize the Destructive Wrath ability of that Cleric, where we can use one of our Cleric charges to deal maximum thunder damage. So this will either do 48 damage if enemies fail their saving throw, or it will do 24 damage if they succeed their saving throw. The other ability that the Trident comes with is Zephyr Break, and this does 6 to 36 damage. However, it does not, for whatever reason, it doesn't benefit from the Destructive Wrath ability that the Tempest Cleric has. Now, the other way we're going to do area of effect damage is through Spirit Guardians. So Spirit Guardians, I think everyone knows at this point, it's a very strong ability. You just leave it out, you fly around the map, you move around the map, and then any enemy in proximity of you is going to take damage. So now to talk about how we're going to deal high amounts of single target damage. So we're going to be doing that through a combination of critical hits, Divine Smite, and Booming Blade. So in order to get a high critical hit rate, you need 2 things. You need to be able to attack with advantage, and you need to be able to reduce your critical hit threshold from 20 to a lower number. So in order for us to get advantage, there's a few ways we can do that. One is through the level 5 Oath of Vengeance Paladin. The level 5 Oath of Vengeance Paladin comes with an ability called Vow of Enmity. Now this ability is supposed to be used in that you get up to an enemy within melee range and you cast it on them, which gives you 10 turns of advantage on attack rolls against that specific enemy. It's a bonus action and it lasts 10 turns without any concentration, although you need to use your Oath charge to use it. Now, there's a bug in which you can cast it on yourself, and if you cast Vow of Enmity on yourself, you then have 10 turns of advantage on all attack rolls against all enemies. So if you use the bug, you get advantage on your attack rolls that way. If you don't want to use this exploit, then there are other ways to get advantage. And the best way is probably using the Gloves of the Automaton. So the Gloves of the Automaton have an ability that's a bonus action called Circuitry Interface. You cast this, and then you get a condition called Form of Artifice. With this, you have 10 turns of advantage on attack rolls without any concentration. So what you would do is you would switch to the Gloves of the Automaton, and then after you cast this on yourself, you simply switch back to the actual gloves that you want to use. Now, in order to reduce the critical hit threshold, we're going to be using various equipments to do that. So the first would be Cerebok's Horned Helmet. This reduces the critical hit rate or critical hit threshold by 1. Now, if you haven't killed Cerebok to get this, the alternative is to use that Dark Justiciar helm or helmet that you get in the Gauntlet of Shar. It also reduces the critical hit threshold by 1. However, you need to be either lightly or heavily obscured in order to get that benefit. So that is a disadvantage of that item. So the best is Cerebok's Horned Helmet. The next item that we're going to use is the Knife of the Undermountain King. This also reduces your critical hit threshold by 1. So we're going to have that Nyrulna Trident in our main hand, and we're going to have the Knife of the Undermountain King in our offhand to receive the benefit of that reduced critical hit threshold. Finally, we're going to have the Deadshot bow. We're never going to actually use the bow. We're again just going to kind of have it for that passive ability to reduce the critical hit threshold by 1. The other way that we can further reduce the critical hit threshold is take the Elixir of Viciousness. This also reduces your critical hit threshold by 1. Now, if you really wanted to be totally optimal in reducing your critical hit threshold, then you would have to be a bad guy. You would have to be the Dark Urge, and you would need to align yourself with Ball so you can get the ability or the trait Most Bloody Inheritance, which further reduces your critical hit threshold by 2. However, a Most Bloody Inheritance is sort of an end game kind of ability, so you may not want to pursue that. Even without that additional 2-point reduction in your critical hit threshold, you'll still be getting plenty of critical hits. You also get diminishing returns as you decrease the critical hit threshold, so for every point further you decrease the critical hit threshold, the critical hit rate increase becomes diminished. So it's not super necessary to go down that pathway. Now, another benefit of taking the 6 levels in the Tempest Domain Cleric is you get that Thunderbolt Strike, which makes it so that whenever you deal thunder or lightning damage, the enemy that's hit with that damage gets knocked back. This is useful for 2 reasons. One is because with Booming Blade, when you hit an enemy, if they get knocked back, then they have to move again to approach you, and in moving, they trigger the Booming Blade damage. The second benefit is that enemies such as Raphael that have some sort of legendary action, when they are knocked back by the Thunderbolt Strike, they can't take those reactions, which you've probably seen in the video. I keep hitting him, even with radiant damage, but he doesn't use any of his like Punish Divinity or his Charm ability on me in the video. Really quickly to talk about the feats that this character uses. The first is Dual Wielder, so you can use the Knife of the Undermountain King as well as the Legendary Trident. And the second is Warcaster, so you have advantage on concentration saving throws. Now, that becomes less relevant, especially if you give the character the Amulet of Greater Health, since this will give you advantage on Constitution saving throw checks, which includes concentration saving throws. Also, to talk about the various armor that the character uses, so we have Armor of Persistence, just really good heavy armor. We have the Helldusk Boots. and this is to prevent us from essentially becoming prone while we're concentrating on something like Spirit Guardians or Haste, since if you fall prone, then you immediately lose concentration. The gloves that we're using, now this is less important. I choose to use the luminous gloves because it's sort of almost like giving yourself more armor. In dealing radiant damage and applying radiant orb, those enemies will have a penalty to their attack rolls on you. As far as rings go, I use the Callous Glow ring. I think it's pretty standard to give a cleric or a paladin this ring, since it just deals extra radiant damage. The other ring, I'm not too sure what would be the best. I use Killer's Sweetheart just to help guarantee an extra critical hit if I really need it. As far as amulets go, I'm using the Amulet of Greater Health here. So that's just to give myself more constitution and more chance of succeeding on concentration saving throws, but you could probably use something else. As far as cloaks, you could either use the Wave Mother's Cloak, the Cloak of Displacement, or the Cloak of Protection. All of these will increase your armor class, so essentially your functional armor class is going to be around 29 to 30, depending on which cloak you use. Your base armor class will be 22 to 24, depending on which cloak you use. And then with the ability to use the shield spell, that will increase your armor class by 5, and then with the addition of haste, that's going to increase your armor class by another 2. So as you can see, you're going to have an armor class of around, let's see, like 29-ish. So that's kind of your defense for this build, in addition to the Radiant Orb, which will give penalties to all your enemies as well. The Fire build is probably the simplest of the builds. It only has 2 subclasses in it. That's going to be 11 levels in Ranger with the Hunter subclass, and then 1 level in Wizard. The general strategy is going to be using the combo of either the Helldust Gloves or the Flawed Helldust Gloves, Oil of Combustion, and Volley as one of the Hunter abilities. Essentially, the first hit of Volley will coat enemies in Oil of Combustion, and then the second administration of fire damage will cause them to each explode. Because we're using the Flawed Helldust Gloves or the Helldust Gloves, we inherently have fire damage to all of our attacks, so we don't need to do anything extra to set off Oil of Combustion once we have it applied. So Oil of Combustion, what it does is enemies essentially explode, dealing 3d6 fire damage in an AoE of 3 meters around themselves. So if you have a group of enemies all clustered around each other and they all explode, dealing that 3d6 fire damage, that means they're each dealing 3d6 fire damage to each other. So for instance, if you have, 5 enemies next to each other, and then they are exploding due to Oil of Combustion, then they're all going to deal 15d6 fire damage to each other. So as I said, our classes are going to be 11 levels in the Hunter Ranger subclass, as well as 1 level in Wizard. The level in Wizard is so we can have access to Haste, the Shield spell, and Fireball. Fireball is really just for flavor. That's not really going to do any much more damage than we're doing with Volley. For our stats, we're going to be investing in Dexterity and Intelligence, around like 16 each. And the feats we're going to take are Sharpshooter and Warcaster. As far as the other equipment, the important stuff is we're going to be using the Mask of Soul Perception, because this gives us +2 to our attack rolls to help offset the Sharpshooter penalty. Our armor is going to be the Unwanted Masterwork Scale Mail, because it's basically the same thing in terms of armor class as the Armor of Agility. It just is 1 less in terms of armor class. It does lack some of the other good stuff that Armor of Agility gives us, like that +2 to saving throws, but since we're using the Armor of Agility on our ice build, we won't have it available for the fire build. I think the unwanted Masterwork Scale Mail fits better with the fire build flavor-wise. Anyways. Our gloves are also important because that's going to be our source of inherent fire damage, and that's going to be the Helldusk or the Flawed Helldusk gloves. Ideally, we're going to use the Helldusk gloves, which we get from the House of Hope, but until then, we can use the Flawed Helldusk gloves. Our shield is going to be the Shield of Scorching Reprisal because it offers the Blazing Retaliation ability. Again, this is very nice for flavor for the fire build. But functionally what it does is it increases our armor class by 1 for 4 turns, and it also makes it so any attacker that misses an attack on us will take 1d6 fire damage. And luckily, for whatever reason, the 1d fire 6 damage that they take doesn't trigger the oil of combustion, so we don't have to fear getting caught in the oil of combustion explosion when an attacker misses us and then takes that fire damage. As far as our bow, ideally we'd be using the Deadshot, but because the Deadshot is going to our Thunder build instead, we just have to choose another good bow, and I don't think it really matters too much. You could use Herald or some other good bow for our ranged weapon. I will say it'll also be kind of difficult to incorporate the fire build in a party of the other 3 builds, especially the ice build and the lightning build, because they rely essentially on chilled and wet statuses. And both those status effects, while they do make the enemies vulnerable to the respective elements, they do cause resistance to fire damage. So I guess one way you might get around that if you're going to have a party of all 4 of these is that you have everyone but the fire build coat their weapons in arsonist oil, so that way the resistance to fire damage is nullified.